Okay. So today we're going to talk about strings, and I will try to make the comparison to numbers anytime it's possible. And if you're going to be listening to this, unfortunately, whenever I move away from there, the sound is going to get a little lower. But I have the same lecture notes from last year if you want to listen to it. Okay, so I am a strings person. A lot of the research that I do actually requires working with strings. So I am much more a strings person than a numbers person, but there are many, many flavors of computer science. But really, essence of computer science really starts to show itself when you work with strings. Okay? So far what we have learned is that you can store data using variables. And the variable names, we saw that you can give variables any kind of name. And the variable names have a specific format. And then given a variable, you can store numbers. You can do any kind of arithmetic. And then you can return the results, or you can store the value in a variable for other use. Okay? So far, that seems pretty limited because there is a lot of other things that you do with computers that involve things other than numbers and arithmetic. So almost everything we do when we post messages to each other, when we send email, when we read stuff on the internet involves not math, but actually reading pieces of text. So to be able to read, write, print, input, output, or do anything with characters, you need to store them in a data type called a string. A string is basically any sequence of characters. It could involve uppercase, lowercase letters, numbers, as well as many other characters that are not necessarily visible but have a purpose, and that's called a string. So basically, whenever you have a string, you actually have to encode it with a start and end symbol. So you have to say my string starts here and goes up to here. So it turns out that Python is actually extremely liberal about what you can use. Other languages are not. So anything between a quotation mark is a string. So for example, you can use a single quote to say that my string starts here and ends here. You can store the value in a variable. So if you type the name of the variable, in fact, it will return you the value. The value of the string is whatever is in the string plus the two quotes. You can have another variable where this time I can quote a string with double quotes. Is there a difference between name1 and name2? No. In fact, they are internally converted to the same data type, which is a string. It is just that you just have to tell the program what is the starting point and ending point is, and Python happens to understand either a single quote or a double quote as a beginning and end of a string. In fact, you can use triple quotes. So you can use 3 copies of the same code. All right, so let's make sure that I am right. Okay. Or you can use 3 copies of the single code. Okay. They all are internally stored as the same data type. So like integer and float, we have a new data type. It's called a string. And you basically have a way to tell when a string starts and a string ends. And Python allows many different options, but not infinite number of options. So one of the rules is that whatever you start with, you also end with the same character, right? So what happens when I start with double quotes, add with a single quote? This is an error because when you started with a double quote, it was trying to go to the end, and then it was searching for another double quote. Since it did not find one, it gave me an error. So this is not a valid string. So whatever you start with, you have to end with the same exact value. So, and the interesting thing with strings is that they can have spaces. So, for example, I can have a string with 3 spaces in it. And I can have a string with 2 spaces. Are they the same string? No, they are actually different strings because they have different values in them. But, you know, you have to know because it's not actually visible. So it's visible to the program, but not to you. So we will see how to work with that in a second. Okay? So what we want to do today is to learn all different ways to work with strings. And it's going to get a little complicated quickly. But so far what we know is that you have a starting and an end point. Okay? So let's go back to name. Name 1 is not there. Do we have name? Yeah. Okay. So the value of the string is the value with the 2 quotes. But you can actually print strings. So if you do a print, it does something slightly different, right? So it does actually print what is inside the string, right? It removes the single quotes and then prints what is actually inside the string. So if you had, bless you, if you had different strings that you wanted to print, you can say print this and something else. It will take the value of the string and then print the value, not with the quotes, but the value is what's inside the string. Whenever you use a comma, it actually puts a space, and then it will print the next one. Okay? Now, what about if you have a string, if you have a name that has an apostrophe in it? Do I have any O'Donovans? Do I have any Irish? Do you put a comma after the O? Okay. I have a friend named O'Donovan, so I will put his name. So let's try this. So if I wanted to write Joe O'Donovan, okay, my good friend, what happens? Is this a valid string? Okay. You can see from the coloring, it's actually kind of subtle. I can see it, but so the string starts here, and when it sees this, it thinks that the string has ended, right? So what happens to the Donovan part? It doesn't know what to do with it because it doesn't really understand what happens, right? So it will say syntax error because this is not a valid way to write a string. This is where the different ways of writing a string is valid because I actually don't need to put the single quotes. I can use double quotes instead. Okay. Because the quote in there is actually special. So in this case, I just went around the problem because I didn't actually show it, but I have a way to do that. What if I want to have a string with a new line in it? I actually want to put a string that has 2 lines, right? So I wanted to say that, first name is John, and then second name is O'Donovan. But as soon as I press enter, it just thinks that the string has ended, right? Because by default, Python is used to reading 1 line at a time. At the end of the line, you basically say, what am I going to do? But in fact, if you had a triple quote string, it will allow new lines. So it will actually have this dot, dot, dot. That tells me that whatever I'm doing from the line above is still continuing. And we will see that a lot. So this tells me that I am not done with whatever this one is, right? It doesn't give me this one back. So in fact, what it is waiting for is for me to write the triple quote again, at which point it will know that I have finished. So John will be happy to know that I'm using his name. Okay. So now I'm able to write actually a string that has multiple lines. And let's figure out what happens when I look at the value of name. So something now interesting happened, right? So I have a string that has John and O'Donovan, but in between I have this /n. So the /n is a special character that does not exist in English, but the programming language understands. /n means a new line. So it's a special character, and in fact, the special characters all have that same format because they all start with a slash. So a special character will always start with a slash. And we have a bunch of special characters. The first one is a new line. Okay. So this string has a new line in it. Another character is /t, which is a tab. Okay. So a tab is generally, it really comes from good old days of typewriters. Have you ever played with typewriters? This is the one instrument that I loved to play as a child, because I know. So the typewriter had a button where it would go to a specific part of the text, right? So there were specified locations. That's what a tab is. Tab is a specified location of the whole screen. So it allows you to align different things. But the tab size is actually not fixed. It depends on your computer may have a different tab size than mine. So there are some issues. We'll talk about that. But tab is basically kind of a specific location in the string. In fact, the double quote or a single quote are special characters, so I need to escape them also if I want to use them. I can do that also with single quote and double quote. Okay? So the way it works is that whenever I'm looking at a string, if I see a slash, I look at the next one, and if it's something valid, then these become a single character, right? So I can have /n. I can have multiple tabs. Did you read what I wrote? We'll see what that is in a second. Hopefully I did that right. So basically, if you've done this long enough, you've become partially computerized yourself. Okay. So it allows me to put these characters in there. But if you want to see what they do, you need to print them, right? So what printing does is it not only removes the quotes, but it actually interprets the special character. So whenever it sees a new line, it actually puts a new line. So if I were to print name, you see that it actually printed in 2 lines because the new line is interpreted as new line. If I did my str, okay, so what it did is it printed the string, but wherever it saw a tab, it actually shifted to the tab location. Okay? And in fact, you can see that there is a tab here, here, and here, and it is aligned with this one here and here. But this word was too long, so it actually came all the way to the end of that tab location. So when I did a tab, it actually went to the next tab location, right? So tabbing can be an interesting thing to play with. So in fact, since I missed this tab location, now I'm in the next tab location, and this like this, right? So actually trying to align things with tabbing happens to be very tricky, and I will not use tabs in this class because I've been burnt by that. We will always use spaces. We will use fixed number of spaces to align things because tabbing is difficult. So you can in fact have multiple characters inside a string. There is one more special character that I missed because that is the more tricky one. When you use /n, it knows that as soon as I see a slash, it's a special character, right? So what if I want to actually write slash? It will never understand slash. Slash is not a well understood character. But, so what do you want? I really want slash, then I actually need to escape the slash. So if you want to have a slash in the string, you actually have to do slash, right? Because you're telling that I really do want slash. I don't want to escape something else. Okay, because slash is serving other purposes, and we want to escape that. So if I were to try to do this, it will actually not work because Python. All right. So what if I wanted to write this? Okay. I wanted to write that to do new line, you actually have to write /n. But I cannot do that because /n is actually new line. But if I did this, I can actually show you /n. Okay. So this is kind of the very simple stuff, but let's exercise first, and then we'll build on this. Okay. So what I want to do now is to look at some of these. Some of the references to TV shows come from me, and some come from my other colleague who teaches this class. Over time, you will find out which one is mine and which one is his. I give it to you as a challenge. Which of these examples come from me and which ones are from them? Okay, so let us try to do these. So you have to look at each of these strings and first ask yourself, is this a valid string? And if it is not a valid string, how would you fix it? Okay? Take 2-3 minutes, please do it, and then we will do it together. Okay. S0, is it a valid string or not? Okay, so start from the beginning, go to the end. Is it the same character? And then check in between if you have the same character. If not, this should work fine. Okay, here is my warning number 1. Okay, are you listening to me for this 1 second? Please, please, please. If you take a PDF, cut and paste this into your program, the string itself is sometimes encoded in Unicode, and that does not work on the homework server. It really shouldn't work on your IDE too, but it does. So don't cut and paste code from PDF. I'm trying to make sure that that actually is always correct. I've played with LaTeX a lot, but even if I were to take this and copy and paste, sometimes it does not work. Okay, so generally speaking, cut and pasting from here is not advised, but you can do it from the website. The website should be fine. Okay, so this one, S0 is fine. How about S1? No, because it starts with a single quote, ends with a double quote. So to fix this, I should change this one to double quote, right? That should be fine. Okay. Clearly, the cheese reference is mine. Do you know that the name of the Python language comes from? Where does it come from? It comes from Monty Python, not from an actual Python. In fact, a lot of the references in Python are to spam and eggs because of YouTube it later. There's a spam and eggs routine. Okay, so that's why we always give some Monty Python references. Okay, so how about this one, S2? Is it valid? Yes. So in a triple quote, you can have anything except for triple quote, right? So you can actually write this specific string. Oops, we don't want that. Okay. So let's try and see if that actually works. Oh, it did not work. What happened? Did it work? Yes, it did, right? Okay. All right, how about S3? No. So this one here is a problem. What you can do is you can actually escape this. So let's do that. So it will tell me invalid string. So one of the things I can do, I can escape this with a slash, or I can use single quotes here, in which case I don't have to escape this one. Line 1, oh yeah, now I have to escape this one. There we go. Okay. So either way is fine. Okay, how about S4? So this is fine, but then this one breaks, right? So I need to escape this one. And how about this one? I'm going to say no. Oh no, because this was double quote, right? So any of the single quote is allowed here. So this one is allowed, these are allowed. But you ended up having 2 commas, right? That's not really allowed. Sadly, Incredible Photogenic Guy is no longer a valid meme. We have to update the course notes. But, it's a little outdated. Okay. So let's try to figure out what this will look like. Just write it down on a piece of paper. Okay. So what do I expect? What I expect is, so I have cats, some number of strings, some number of spaces because of tab, R. Then I will have a new line. Then I will have a tab, which will actually get it here. I will have good. I will have another tab, which will go here. I will have a new line. Did somebody meow there? All right. That's pretty good. All right. So then I have two tabs. One tab here, the second tab here, so it's going to come to here. Okay. Off. Another tab. Internet. And another tab, memes. Something like this, right? Do we think? Okay. The only way to see these interpreted is to print them. Right? So when you print them, all the control characters in them are tab. That never goes away, as the one truism of internet is cats. Okay, so these are all very simple, but it is actually very important because this is where everything goes wrong. But once you know this, now we can do some more interesting things. Okay? So, like you can do stuff with numbers, what are the things we can do with numbers? We can add numbers, we can multiply numbers, right? And this gives us new numbers. In fact, I can do all sorts of operations on strings as well. And when you do an operation on string, generally you get a new string. So one of the things that you can do is take two strings and concatenate them, meaning that make them into a new string. So you can actually have, let's do that. You can take two sets of strings, and when you put a plus, you actually are concatenating the two strings and making them into a new string. But you are taking them exactly as is. Okay? So when I concatenate these two strings, what will I get? Will I get Larry Wilmore with a space in between or not? No. Okay? Because I just put them together like that, right? If you wanted a string between those two, you actually have to concatenate a string in between or do something else. Okay? So I can do as many of them as possible. So I can actually concatenate three strings together. And it is so that Python is super, super nice to you. You can probably do that without even putting the plus. Even that's allowed, but don't do this because this doesn't always work, okay? And sometimes you ask me why it doesn't work, and you know, my best answer is because I told you so. But there is a deep reason why, because of the way it parses it, it understands it, but none of that is important because what you care is that when you do it, it won't work. So just don't do it. So I recommend always use a plus when you are concatenating strings. But this is a very important thing to remember. Now something interesting has happened. Plus now works differently depending on what data type you use. If you take two strings, okay? If you take two strings, it adds them up. If you take two numbers, it adds them up, but the result is different. The same operator plus works very differently if you are adding two strings or two numbers. What happens if you take a string and a number? Does it make any sense? It should not work, but in the past, Python proved me wrong. Yes, all right. It tells me that I cannot, so basically, here's what happened. When you started with a string and then it said plus, now Python has an expectation that the next thing should also be a string, right? I was confused because if you start a string plus, it should be another string, Okay. Sometimes these are different in different operating language, different programming languages. Some languages will actually immediately assume that whatever comes next, I will convert to a string. Luckily, Python doesn't do that because it can be confusing. Okay. So if I did the same but in the different order, what will be the same? What will be the error? It's kind of the same, but now it saw an integer and it wanted a number in the next one. Since it was not a number, it was also not happy, right? So you can concatenate two strings or two numbers, and you get a appropriate result. So so you can actually do lots of different things. So you can do print. What it did is it first executed this concatenation. It gave you a string, and then it printed the result. Or you can do this. What it will do is it will print the first string and then the second string. But the difference is that when you put a comma in the print statement, it always thinks that I should put a space and then the next thing, right? So this is the way the print works. Anytime you put a comma, it assumes that you're going to print something else. It puts some space and waits for something else to print. Question? No. All right. Okay, here's another operation. You can take a string and then you can repeat it a number of times. So you do that, you multiply actually. So you take a string, you multiply it with number of times, and then you concatenate that result. I'm just having Stephen Colbert stuff in honor of Stephen Colbert. If I wanted to actually have Stephen repeated 4 times with a space, then I really should put a space here. Okay? But remember, it will have a space at the very end too, right? Because it's repeating the same thing. What if I wanted to have repeated 4 times, but space in between the first 3, but not at the very end? That's right. Like this. Okay. I can also do something a little bit more. Okay, so let's use this. So what I can do is I can take name, add space, multiply that 3 times, and then I add name again. All right? So it's doing the same thing, but I'm now doing it with take the name, concatenate space, right? Now you get a new string, multiply that 3 times, then add another copy of the name at the very end. Okay? This way, if you make a mistake in name, you're not going to have to fix it in 2 places, but in 1. What if I wanted to actually have it in 4 separate lines? I want to have Stephen, 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 Stephen. What would I do? Right, instead of space, I can just put /n, right? So let's do that one. Okay. What would be the difference if I did this? Would it produce the same result? So I had Stephen, 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 4 lines. If I did this one, it will have 5 lines. Okay. Okay. So this is now teaching us how print works. Okay. Every time you print, it will print something and then put a new line. Right? If I printed something that has a new line, it will put the new line in the string and then add a new line. Right? So because of that, if you want to control exactly what you print, you have to construct the string you're going to print and then print it. So there are 2 things we know about print. One is that it will always put a space after each comma. So you can print all number of things thanks to Python. Okay? And then every time you have a new print statement, it will in fact put a new line. Okay? Doesn't like this thing, so I'm going to get rid of. Oh, I see. So every time you have a comma, you actually have a space right here. Okay? So what happens if I put a comma here? Now the nice thing is in Python you can just see. Every time you have a comma, it will in fact assume that you are going to be printing to the same line, but it will put a space and print the next one. So in fact, even though I have two separate print statements, it did not actually put a new line because comma means that I'm still continuing this line. Okay? So how about this? So this will print hello world 3 times. Okay, we are fine with that. How about this one? 3 times string. What do we think? Not good? Again, so now you start with 3 times. It assumes that you are actually multiplying numbers, right? Because number times can only be something else. At first I knew it. I knew it was going to make this to me. All right. I shouldn't work, but it does. Don't do it. Okay, I guess that didn't make me look good. Python. Okay, I was just discussing this with somebody today, but no, it just does it to piss me off. Okay, so few more things. You can also take a string and find something about it. One of the main things that we want is the length of a string. Okay? So the length is what we call a function. You can put a string inside, and then it will return you a number, which is the length of the characters in the string. Okay? So this one has 6 characters because you have HELLO exclamation point. Okay? How many characters does this have? How many? 7, right? /n is a single character. Okay? How many characters does this have? Also 7 because you have hello and space. Space is 1 character, right? The other thing that you can do is you can convert between variables. So you can, for example, take a number and convert that to a string. When you do convert something to a string, it actually will return you a string that contains that value. Okay? And this is something we are going to do very frequently as a mistake. Okay? So you can, what happens when I do this? Right. But when I do this, I get 10, right? This will become obvious in a second, and you will see why. You can also take a string that actually contains a number and convert it to an integer. Okay, so the string with 4 in it, I can convert to an integer and it will become 4. But a string with a, when I convert to an integer, will be error, right? in fact, it will be an error even if I don't have an integer. Is it going to be an error? One of these gives an error, one of these truncates. I think this one gives an error. Yes. All right. This is why you have to memorize it. Each one works a little differently. Okay? So it doesn't just take the number and truncates it. Okay? This is very confusing. In a second, I will confuse the hell out of you. You can do the same thing like this, right? So you can take a string that contains a number, convert it to a float. And that will work whether you have an integer or a float. It will work regardless. But of course, it will not work if it's not actually a number. Right? So you can convert between data types by int, str, float. But remember that you cannot, we have not yet learned how to check if it's a valid value. We will learn that in about a week, but not immediately. So for now, assume values are valid if you are using int or float. Okay. But as a special, favor to all of you, just to confuse the hell out of you, I will show you a little bit of something. Yes. No, I'll show you that exactly that in a second. Okay. So on Monday we are going to learn a whole bunch of functions. Okay. You will learn functions, and so the same way we learned about plus, right? So functions work differently depending on what the inputs are. So let's look at this for a second. So I have a function. It's actually a basic operation. That if I have a plus sign between two numbers, we know that we are adding those numbers up, right? And it will give me an 8. Okay. You say, well, what about that? All right, so I have this. What is 4 plus 4? 44. There you go. Now you're all computer science. Okay. So the point is that even though it is plus, they are totally different stuff, right? One is doing mathematics, the other one is doing string concatenation. They are totally different functions, right? So in fact, these go into totally different places to find what does plus mean, right? So this is a totally different function than this one, even though they look the same. And this is something we will see again and again. So in fact, the same thing exists for many functions. And this is one of the reasons Python is super useful and easy to use, but also sometimes confusing. So one of these functions that we have learned is int. There is an int that takes a string that has a value in it. And what is the result of that? It will return you 4. And not only that, it's kind of a very picky function that if you were to give, then it will do, right, we'll figure out. Okay? Because this is an int function, it's kind of a very, boring function, and it has its own way. It's an int function that works on strings. Okay? So this is an int function with string, right? So anytime you have a function, it really matters what the data types is applying are. But there is another int function that works on numbers. Okay? That's a cooler function. So that int function is take any number, it will give you the integer portion of that number, which in this case would be 4. Okay? That's just as a totally different function. It's just like, it just says this is your stupid function, but they are not the same thing. Right? So, and this is partially the point of programming is to learn the distinction. So in fact, if I were to do this, that will just give me 4. But it just doesn't work for if 4.4 was a string, right? What I can do is I can actually go through the step. I can take 4.4, convert that to a number, and I can take the result and convert to an integer. That would work. But that works because float returns actually a number, and then it calls the second int function, not the first int function. Was that really confusing? Is this okay? All right, so I know it's too much, but we will see that a lot. But it is just that important you understand how exactly to use one of these. This is why we learn syntax. Syntax is the vocabulary. Without that, we cannot write programs. Okay? So let's do a couple more of these, and then we will do some more interesting stuff. All right. Please make an effort to do these for I will give you 5 minutes. Let's try this again. All right, let's try these. And I need to finish up some material today because you're going to need it in the homework. So I'm going to go a little fast, but I will do all of it. So what is length of George? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? All right. So this is 6. Okay. How about length of Tom? You can see it's the same, right? Because it has the spaces. Okay. How about the length of this one? Clearly, we do not see where the spaces are, right? Because it is possible that I have hi, space, 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 right? And then mom, space, space, space. So a good computer science answer to this one would be what? So I have 1, 2, new line, right? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 8, right? So mom and a new line. So the answer is 8 or more, right? Because I don't know. Do we know there are spaces? I say at least 8. I like these kinds of wise-ass answers. Because clearly it could be more, but at least it's 8, right? So hi and mom and 2 new lines. So this is going to give me at least 8. Okay? So how about this? ABC plus str5 legal? Yep, so I will get ABC 5. Okay, how about this one? Can I take a string, multiply it with a string? Not to my knowledge. All right, so you can try what happens A star B. No, that's not allowed, right? How about ABC plus 5? Nope, does not work. How about ABC times 5? Yep, so I will repeat ABC 5 times, like this. How about this? No. How about this? Again, string plus number, not allowed. How about this? Right, so it's 3.0 repeated 3 times. Okay. So let's try that. STR 3.0 times 3. Okay. All right, let's write a line of code that prints 50 stars. What do I do? Take star, multiply that by 50, right? And now I am going to print it. Honestly, this is the only thing you need to do the next lab coming up. Okay? All right, so now let's do the last one. I want to write a program that prints Monty Python, one line, then prints as many equal signs as there are in Monty Python. So let's try to write a little program to do that. Okay. So when I print a name, it just prints the name and puts a new line. So in the next line now, I want to actually print equal signs, right? So I want to print equal signs like this. But I don't want to print a single equal sign. I want to print as many as there are characters in the Monty Python, right? So how do I find how many characters there are in Monty Python? The length. So I can find the length of the string, right? And then repeat the equal sign as many times as there are in here. Okay? So one of the things that we have not yet learned is how to actually read something from the user. So this is going to be important for your lab and your homework. So instead of this name being completely given, I'm actually going to read it from the user. So all you have to do is use this function called raw input. And the raw input will actually do the following. Okay? So when I execute the program, you can see that it is flashing. What it means is that it's actually waiting for me to type something. So I am going to type Monty Python, okay? And I can type as much as I want. It will wait until I press enter, right? So this is not good for strings with a new line in it. We will talk about that later, right? But as soon as I press enter, it will take the value that I entered, convert it to a string, always a string, and then return that value. And since I'm assigning that value to name, this name will now have the value of whatever I entered. Okay? So this is kind of how we do input-output. So it is important to kind of get familiar with that one. So this kind of works slightly differently, right? My program doesn't just execute, it actually stops at when it sees raw input. And it will stop until I press new line, and it will take everything I typed up to new line and return it as a string. And what this one does, it actually takes that string, assigns it to this variable called name. You can use any variable. If you want to actually make it a little more obvious that you are actually asking for something, you can put a string inside raw input, which will be what the user will see. For example, I can say, enter a name. Okay. So now what it will do is it will print a string, and then we'll wait at the end of the string. So, okay. Now it's waiting for me to type something. All right, let's do one more Colbert. Okay. So, so again, I type as much as I want. I can go back. I can finish. As soon as I enter new line, it will take that, put it in a string, and return it. Now, the interesting thing is this. Even if you were to enter a number, it will still read it as a string. So let's write this. Even if I'm like obsessively telling me enter a number, right? Now it's waiting for me to enter a number, and I'm going to enter a number, many numbers, okay? The value that it returned, remember now I stored in this variable called x, but x is actually a string, right? If you wanted to treat it as a number, now you have to convert this value to an integer. So we know how to do that. I can actually say, well, take int x, take the value of x, convert it to an integer, store it back in the variable x. Okay? This is something you cannot do in many other languages because Python allows you to change. X was a string before, today it's a number. Okay? So now x is actually a number. Or if you know this for sure, then you can actually do this. So you can say, whatever the raw input will return, convert it to an integer, then store the result in x. So if I were to now enter this, x is actually a number because I read it the value. Before I assigned it to x, I also first converted to an integer, then did this. Of course, this will not work if I were to enter ABC, right? You told me to enter a number, but what do people do? They don't follow the rules. But now it's going to tell me that this doesn't work because I cannot convert ABC to a number, right? So this is not allowed. So one thing that we haven't done today is to do formatted output. So that's not strictly necessary for all parts of the homework, but one part of the homework will be easier. So, you know, even if you don't match the output exactly, I will do this on Monday. So don't worry too much about the formatting, and then we'll continue with the next lecture.